Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, Bootlish, shills, death slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, insurrectionists. I'm a useful idiot. And how about that? Trump's first day in office, and he pardons 1,500 so-called January 6th insurrectionists, although I consider them more tourists. And I already did a video about my view of an insurrection that's not an insurrection, and I'll recap a little bit here. It wasn't an insurrection. There was no actual attempt to topple the government, have a coup d'etat, kill congressmen, or stop the peaceful transition of power. It was just a protest that got out of hand. And I would add that I didn't put in the last video the fact that the violence may never have even happened if there weren't some 20 odd, if not more, federal spooks in the crowd egging them on. And Ray Epps being a notable example of that. Notice there's no charges against him, and he was a federal plant, and he instigated the violence and pushed the rioters on, and no charges are brought against him. So that's just one example. But there's also the fact that, all in all, there weren't any real weapons being used, so pretty lame insurrection. And there was no arson or looting and that sort of thing. So anyway, reference my previous video on the insurrection that wasn't to go into the full details about that. But what I find interesting about this is, first of all, it shows right off the bat that Trump is really serious. And the other thing, of course, is he's kicked a hornet's nest, and all the liberals are just going ape shit. And a lot of this is because that's a very important narrative for the liberal media and the liberal politicians, this whole idea that January 6th somehow compares to Pearl Harbor and the Holocaust, which of course is ridiculous. But they've done a great job of manufacturing this narrative that there was some gigantic threat to democracy and that America was almost toppled by 2,000 drunken partiers at the Capitol that day. But the other thing that's interesting, of course, is that we're seeing this tit for tat. We have these Biden pardons of his entire family and all the people on the January 6th committee, including Liz Cheney and Adam Schiff. And I saw a news conference today with Democratic senators, and Chuck Schumer was asked about the Biden pardons and the Trump pardons. And he just brushed it off and said, we're looking to the future, and refused to answer the question. And I find that really interesting, too, because the Biden pardons, of course, happened about 2 days ago, and the January 6th events happened 4 years ago, and they want to keep that alive, but they don't want to talk about Biden's pardons a couple of days ago. So that's pretty disingenuous. But one of the things I want to do is make an analogy. And Trump actually, in a press conference yesterday, brought this up, and I think it's a really good point. But I'm going to take it a little step further with the analogy. Let's suppose that the BLM Antifa riots happened, and Trump took the entire government apparatus in the Department of Justice and went after all the people involved in all those acts back during the BLM Antifa riots, and used facial recognition to track down every single one of them and put them all in prison. And then, so let's suppose that happened. And then Biden comes along and he pardons all of those people. So you can see the glaring hypocrisy of liberal media and liberal politicians immediately, because one, of course, that didn't happen. But two, if Biden had pardoned all the BLM and Antifa rioters, of course, the liberal base would be very excited and think justice was served, and they would be cheering it on. But when the tables are turned, of course, they don't think of it in that way at all. Let me remind you once again that January 6th, there was no arsons, there was no weapons, there was really none of the kind of violence that we saw in the Antifa BLM riots, where entire downtown areas were burned and looted, and actually lots of people died. That's another tangent point I want to bring up, is the fact that aside from the mythology that's been created, two people died during the January 6th Capitol incident. One of them was a police officer who was hit, then actually was taken to the hospital and died of natural causes. So he doesn't even really count. And then the other one was a woman, Ashley Babbitt, that was shot and killed by a Capitol policeman. And so the liberal media is all talking about how dare all these January 6th people who assaulted police officers are being let go, but they don't have any problem with Biden pardoning a Capitol policeman who shot and killed somebody on January 6th. So just more hypocrisy on top of hypocrisy. So I think it's great. I think it's great that the January 6th, mostly tourists, were pardoned. And as Trump pointed out, a lot of them have already spent 4 years in jail and were facing a lot of stiff penalties for their involvement, including a lot of people that weren't even there, that just supported the January 6th events online. And so the Biden administration and the Department of Justice were relentless in going after every single person that had anything remotely to do with January 6th. And so, like I say, when you look at the analogy, it makes it perfectly clear what kind of hypocrisy we have here. And of course, the liberal media talked about the Antifa and BLM riots as being, quote, mostly peaceful, unquote. But the conservatives certainly are not allowed to say that January 6th was mostly peaceful, which it generally was, especially when you see the video footage of once they got into the Capitol building. They weren't burning and looting and attacking people. They were tourists, and they were being guided around by Capitol policemen. So that whole narrative falls apart. But I think this is a great thing. I think it's a great thing that Trump did. I'm glad to hear that a lot of these people already served too much time, and they're going to be reunited with their families. And then, of course, the bonus is that the liberals are going to go apeshit, and they are going apeshit. So bravo. Bravo, President Trump, for kicking a hornet's nest and doing it so easily, just with the slight manipulation of a pen on paper. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?